I still remember the way he looked at me that morning. Calm, composed, and heartbreakingly distant. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. Just one quiet line. "I think it's time we went separate ways." And just like that, I wasn't his assistant anymore. The world called him a legend. Rocky, Rambo, the man who turned pain into power. But to me, he was just Mr. Stallone, the person who'd once believed I could handle the chaos that came with his name. I had worked beside him for nearly 5 years, through press tours, sleepless nights, and lonely flights across time zones. I knew his coffee by heart, his silence by tone, his fatigue by the way his shoulders sank when no one was watching. But that morning, all of it ended. Not with anger, not with drama, just distance. I told myself it was fine, that I'd find another job, another purpose. But the truth? You don't walk away from someone like him and feel nothing. For weeks, I couldn't bring myself to unpack the box that held the mug he once gave me, the one that said, "Keep punching." Those 2 words haunted me every morning, because while the world saw a man made of muscle and grit, I'd seen the quiet one, the one who stayed after the cameras stopped rolling, rewriting lines alone in the dark, still fighting battles no one else could see. I told myself I'd never go back. That pride mattered more than memories, but sometimes life doesn't listen to pride. Sometimes it throws you right back into the life you thought you'd escaped. And for me, that moment came years later, when the man who once fired me needed help and everyone else had already walked away. When I first met Mr. Stallone, I didn't even know how to act around him. He wasn't just another actor. He was a name that carried its own gravity, the kind of presence that makes you forget your lines, even if you weren't meant to speak. I was 26, freshly fired from a production office job after I accidentally sent a confidential email to the wrong client. Hollywood didn't forgive mistakes easily, and I was running out of chances. A friend from an old agency told me about a temporary assistant position for a well-known actor. They didn't say the name. Maybe because if they had, I would have never shown up. Too nervous, too convinced I didn't belong in his orbit. When I walked into his Beverly Hills office that morning, I expected chaos. But it was quiet. The kind of quiet that hums with purpose. Scripts stacked neatly, old boxing gloves in a glass case, a single photograph of his daughters on the desk. He looked up when I entered. Sharp eyes, kind smile, voice that could command or comfort depending on the tone. "You're the new one?" he asked. I nodded, clutching my resume like a shield. "What's your name?" "Lena," I said. "Lena Carter." He leaned back, studying me with that mix of curiosity and quiet humor that he wore so naturally. "All right, Lena Carter. Coffee's over there, schedule's on the desk, and don't call me sir. Makes me feel ancient." That was how it began. No dramatic audition, no handshake under spotlights. Just 2 people trying to make something work. I didn't expect to stay more than a month. But 1 month turned into 5 years. I learned his rhythms, how he liked his scripts printed in thick paper because thin ones wrinkled too easy. How he'd write at 2 a.m. with old Frank Sinatra playing low. How he'd smile when fans shouted, "Yo, Rocky," from across the street. Not out of pride, but because he knew what it meant to them. He wasn't just an actor, he was an idea. And working beside that, living beside that, was something I could never explain. He could be tough sometimes, precise, demanding, but never cruel. He respected people who worked hard, maybe because he'd been the underdog once too. I still remember one night a few months after I started. He was editing a script, exhausted, rubbing his forehead. The lights were dim, and I could hear rain against the office windows. He sighed. "You ever feel like you're running in circles, Lena? Like no matter how much you give, it's never enough?" I didn't know what to say. He wasn't asking for advice. He just needed someone who'd listen. So I said the only thing that came to mind. Maybe you're just chasing the wrong finish line." He looked at me, long and quiet. Then he smiled, that half smile of his. The one that came when he found truth in unexpected places. "That's not bad," he said. "You should write that down somewhere." Working for him wasn't easy. His schedule changed like weather. Interviews, film rewrites, calls from producers in different time zones. But he noticed things. If I worked late, he'd leave me a note on the desk. "Go home, kid. Life's not a contest." And yet, I started caring too much. Not in the way tabloids twist it, No, this was different. It was the kind of care that comes from loyalty, from seeing someone human behind the legend. He trusted me with details, family calls, small gifts for fans, letters he didn't have time to write. Sometimes, when the cameras stopped, he'd let the silence speak longer than his words could. And in that silence, I began to understand how lonely success could be. Then came that year, the one that changed everything. He was preparing for a major film comeback. Pressure was high, and his team was changing fast. New managers, new faces. I was still there, still believing I was part of his core circle. But success can make people wary. I made a small mistake, a scheduling mix-up that caused a meeting to fall through. Nothing terrible, just bad timing. And that's when he said those words I'll never forget. I think it's time we went separate ways. No anger, no blame, just quiet disappointment. The kind that hurts more than shouting ever could. I walked out of that office that day, holding my box of things. A pen he'd signed once, a small photo from a movie set, and that mug with the words, "Keep punching." I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't trust myself not to cry if I did. For a while I tried to move on. I worked freelance, wrote small pieces for local magazines, kept my head down. But every time I passed a theater showing his films, something inside me twisted. Because no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the echo of his voice saying, "Keep punching." I didn't know then that life was leading me back to him. Through pain, distance, and time. I didn't know that one day, years later, I'd get a call from someone on his team, saying he wasn't doing well, not physically, but emotionally, and they needed someone he could trust. Someone from before. It was a quiet evening when the call came. The kind of call that changes the direction of your heart before your mind catches up. "Lena, this is Daniel from Mr. Stallone's office. I'm not sure if you remember me." Of course I remembered. Daniel was one of the new assistants who'd replaced me years ago. Younger, faster, better connected. His voice on the phone carried a strain, polite but fragile. "Mr. Stallone's been distant lately," he said carefully. "He's not himself. The studio wants him focused for a project, but he's barely showing up. He doesn't talk to anyone. He asked for you." I froze. Me? After all this time? My mind wanted to protect itself, to say no, to stay safe behind the walls I'd built since he let me go. But my heart whispered otherwise. "When does he want to meet?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, if you can." That night I didn't sleep. Every memory replayed like an old film reel. Coffee runs, script readings, quiet laughs. And then that final moment, his words slicing through the air. It's time we went separate ways. Now I was the one choosing whether to return. It didn't feel like revenge or closure. It felt like unfinished business, the kind that lingers between two people who never said everything they meant to. I arrived at his house the next morning. The gates opened slowly, creaking like they hadn't been used much. The garden was overgrown. There was a stillness that didn't belong to the man I once knew. The man who used to jog before sunrise, rewrite scripts by candlelight, and insist on movement in every sense of life. Daniel met me at the door. He looked nervous. He's in his study, been there most days. He's quieter now. As I stepped inside, I noticed how different the air felt. Heavier, older, softer. The walls were lined with awards, framed movie posters, reminders of a lifetime spent in the public eye, but the room smelled faintly of dust and silence. He was sitting by the window reading. Not a script, just a small worn notebook. When he looked up, I saw it instantly. The years had changed him, not just in age, but in spirit. His eyes, once sharp with energy, now held something gentler, a tired kind of peace, mixed with a shadow of loneliness. "Lena," he said quietly, "you came." I nodded. I wasn't sure I should. He smiled faintly. Neither was I. There was an awkward pause, the kind that lives between people who used to know each other well, but don't know how to start again. He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit, I could use some old company." I sat. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sunlight fell through half-closed blinds, striping his face in gold and shadow. "I didn't treat you right," he said finally. "I was too focused on proving something that didn't need proving anymore." His honesty stunned me. I had imagined this moment 1,000 ways, some angry, some tearful, but never this quietly real. "You don't owe me an apology," I said softly. "We both made choices." He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw that same flicker of respect I remembered from our first week together. "You were the only one who ever told me no when I needed to hear it," he said. "Everyone else just nods now." Over the next few weeks, I found myself returning, not as his assistant, but as something closer to a familiar voice. He was trying to write again, but the words wouldn't come easily. The movie world had shifted, faster, louder, less patient for the kind of storytelling he believed in. I helped organize old notes, reread drafts, sometimes just sat quietly while he stared at the screen. It wasn't work. It was something more sacred, the act of helping someone remember who they were. One night, while reviewing a script, he sighed. "You ever feel like the world moved on without you?" I smiled sadly. Every day. He looked up at me, eyes soft. "That's the thing about this business, Lena. It forgets the hands that built it." He didn't mean himself. I could hear it in his tone. He meant people like me. The unseen. The ones who stay behind the curtains, holding the world together quietly. But the closer we grew again, the more I saw the cracks. He was hiding pain. Not physical, but emotional. Some days he'd sit for hours staring at old photographs, tracing faces with his thumb. Other days he'd talk endlessly about scripts that never got made, dreams that slipped through time. Once he told me, "When I was young, I thought success would fill the silence inside me. Turns out, it just made the silence louder." That line broke something in me, because I knew what he meant. I'd spent years chasing validation too. Maybe that's why I came back. Not for closure, not for the job, but because somewhere between his loneliness and mine, we understood each other. Then, one evening, it happened. The moment that changed everything. He had a meeting the next morning, a potential comeback project that could define his later years. I stayed up late preparing notes, making sure everything was perfect. When I arrived at his home the next day, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Daniel wasn't around. The study door was slightly open. I found him sitting there, staring at his laptop. On the screen was an email. I recognized the name. An executive I knew too well. Someone who used to manipulate contracts, pushing unfair deals even with legends like him. The email was a trap. Hidden clauses, financial control, long-term rights. I skimmed it once and felt my stomach twist. He was about to sign it. "You shouldn't sign this," I said firmly. He looked up, surprised. "What do you mean? They said it's standard procedure." "It's not," I whispered. "They're taking your story, your legacy. You'd just be a face, nothing more." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed, closing the laptop. "You always did have a good eye for truth," he murmured. And for the first time, there it was again. That bond from years ago. Unspoken, unplanned, but real. That was the night I realized how fragile he'd become. Not in strength, but in trust. He'd been surrounded for so long by people who saw only Sylvester Stallone, the icon, not Sly, the man. And somehow, after all this time, I was the only one who still did. From that day, I stayed longer hours, made sure he ate, reminded him to rest. It wasn't part of any job. It was care. Quiet, patient, human care. But I also knew something else was coming. Fame and redemption don't coexist easily. And the closer you get to someone trying to rebuild their world, the more likely you are to be caught in the storm. I didn't realize how much I'd begun to care again until the night I found him sitting in the dark. It was late, past midnight. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic. He hadn't returned my messages all day, which wasn't like him. Something inside me, that quiet intuition you get when you've known someone too long, told me to check in. When I entered the study, the only light came from a small lamp on the corner of his desk. He was sitting there, shoulders hunched, staring at a pile of old photographs spread across the table. "Mr. Stallone?" I said softly. He looked up slowly. His eyes were tired, but not from lack of sleep, from remembering. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, "how it feels to become a stranger in your own story?" I didn't know how to answer that. He motioned for me to sit, then slid one of the photographs toward me. It was an old behind-the-scenes picture, from Rocky II, I think. He was younger, glowing with energy and purpose, surrounded by people all smiling. "They're all gone now," he murmured. "Different cities, different lives. Some don't even call." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a softness that comes when nostalgia turns into mourning. "You gave them everything," I said quietly. He smiled sadly. "Yeah, maybe that's the problem. When you give everything, what's left for you?" That night, we didn't talk about movies or scripts. We talked about time, about how it slips away while you're too busy building something for everyone else. He told me stories I'd never heard. The struggle before Rocky, how he sold his dog to survive, how he fought to buy him back once success came. And then he said something that made my chest tighten. "I've spent my life trying to be a hero on screen, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be one off it." Silence fell between us. I wanted to tell him he was still one, to millions. But maybe that wasn't what he needed to hear. Sometimes heroes just need someone who sees them without the cape. Weeks passed, and slowly I saw him change. He began to write again. Small pages at first, fragments of thoughts, scenes without names. He smiled more often, laughed occasionally. He even went out for a short walk one morning, his first in months. But behind that progress, I could still feel something unsettled, a heaviness he wouldn't share. Then one afternoon, I found out why. Daniel came to me in a rush, holding a letter. "He's not supposed to see this," he said, voice trembling. It was from the same production company that had tried to corner him with that contract earlier. Only this time, it was personal. They'd decided to move forward without him. The new project, the one he'd been quietly shaping for months, would continue with a younger actor, a fresh face. In short, they were replacing him. I felt my heart sink. He hadn't seen it yet, but I knew he would. That evening, I stayed late again. He came into the room holding that same letter. His face was calm, too calm. "They finally did it," he said quietly. "They moved on." He placed the letter on the desk and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "It's strange, Lena. You spend years proving you can survive failure. But no one teaches you how to survive being forgotten." There were no words I could offer that would fix that kind of ache. So I just sat beside him. We didn't speak for a long time. After a while, he whispered, "Maybe this is life's way of telling me it's time to stop fighting." I shook my head, tears threatening to fall. "No, maybe it's telling you it's time to start living." He looked at me then, really looked. The years, the distance, the misunderstandings, all of it faded for a heartbeat. What remained was two people who had walked through different storms and found each other again at the quiet end of one. The next morning, I found a note on his desk. "Gone to the old gym, don't wait up." The old gym, the one where Rocky was born. I drove there instinctively. The place was almost empty, the scent of dust and sweat hanging in the air. He was there, shadowboxing slowly, his movements heavy but deliberate, like a man remembering who he used to be. I stood in the doorway watching silently. Every punch, every breath carried a message, not for the world but for himself. He wasn't fighting an opponent. He was fighting doubt, fighting the silence, fighting the idea that he didn't matter anymore. When he finally stopped, he turned and saw me. Sweat glistened on his face. He smiled faintly. "Still here?" "Always," I said softly. We sat on the old bench after that, the sound of the city muffled beyond the gym walls. He told me he wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of chasing relevance, tired of pretending that age was defeat. "You know," he said, "people think success is about winning, but it's not. It's about standing up when no one's watching." I smiled. "You taught me that once." He chuckled. "Yeah, well, maybe I needed reminding." Something shifted after that day. He didn't sign new deals. He didn't call the studios. Instead, he started mentoring young writers quietly, reading their scripts, leaving handwritten notes. He told me he wanted to give back. If I can't be the one on screen anymore, maybe I can help someone else find their shot. That was the man I'd always known. The one behind the fame, behind the name. And maybe that's why what happened next hurt even more. A month later, I received a letter addressed to me. Inside was a short note written in his neat, slanted handwriting. "Lena, you've done more for me than I ever deserved. It's time I stood on my own again. Don't come by for a while. Keep punching." I read it over and over, my heart cracking in quiet disbelief. He was leaving again, but this time not out of anger. Out of gratitude, maybe. Out of pride. Still, it felt like being let go all over again. Only this time I understood. Sometimes people step away not because they don't care, but because they finally can. Because you helped them find enough strength to stand without you. For days, the house stayed silent. No calls, no visits, just echoes of old conversations, fading softly into memory. But deep down, I knew I hadn't lost him this time. This wasn't the end. Just another beginning neither of us could see yet. Time passed the way seasons change, quietly, without permission. Summer slipped into autumn. The air grew colder, and yet the space he left behind stayed warm somehow, like the echo of someone's voice that never really fades. At first, I tried not to think about him. I buried myself in small routines, making coffee in the morning, walking to the park, writing little notes I'd never send. But some days the silence was too loud. Some mornings, I'd wake up thinking I heard his gravelly voice calling from the study, or the faint scratch of his pen on paper. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes after you've cared for someone deeply. It's not about missing their presence. It's about missing the purpose they gave you. And for a long while, I wondered if that was all I was meant to be. The helper who fades when the hero finds his way again. Then one evening, I got a call from Daniel. His voice sounded brighter than usual. "You need to see this," he said, almost laughing. "Turn on Channel 5. I grabbed the remote, half curious, half afraid. The screen lit up to a live charity event, the kind Stallone used to avoid, saying he'd had enough of red carpets. But there he was, standing on stage. Older, yes, slower maybe, but there was light in his eyes again, that unmistakable spark that had once carried him from the streets to stardom. He was speaking about resilience, about failure, about getting back up. "We all fall down," he said, his voice calm, firm. "But if you're lucky, really lucky, someone will remind you how to stand again. Sometimes it's not a fan, not a friend, not even family. Sometimes it's someone you never expected to care." The audience was quiet. Then he smiled, that same rare, humble smile I hadn't seen in years. "To that person," he said softly, "if you're watching, thank you." My chest tightened. I didn't need him to say my name. I knew. I sat there alone in my apartment, tears streaming silently down my face. But they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that come when you realize the pain was worth it. That what you gave mattered. A few days later, I received another letter. This time it wasn't short. It was several pages, folded carefully, written in his bold, uneven handwriting. "Lena, you were right. I needed to live again. Not fight, not prove, just live. I've started working with young filmmakers, the kind who remind me what it feels like to dream. They're rough, raw, and full of hunger. It's like looking in a mirror from 40 years ago." He went on to say he'd been traveling quietly, visiting community centers, teaching workshops, meeting kids who had big stories but no way to tell them. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was passing it on. "I realized something," he wrote. "We spend our lives building legacies for the world to remember. But maybe the real legacy is what we leave in people who remember us quietly." At the bottom, there was one last line. "You reminded me I was still human. That's worth more than any film." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my journal. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Because I finally understood something I hadn't before. You don't always get to stay in someone's story forever. Sometimes your purpose is just to help them through one difficult chapter. And that's okay. Months later, fate brought us face to face again. It was at a small, private screening of a documentary he'd helped produce, about second chances and forgotten dreams. I didn't even know he'd be there. He spotted me as soon as I walked in. For a moment, he looked surprised. Then that slow, familiar smile appeared. He walked toward me, not as Mr. Stallone, but as a man at peace with himself. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said gently. "I wasn't sure I'd come," I admitted, "but I'm glad I did." He nodded, his eyes soft. "You know, I kept your note on my desk, the one that said, 'Keep punching.' Guess it finally worked." We both laughed, that quiet, knowing kind of laughter that comes when words aren't needed anymore. During the screening, I watched him from the corner of my eye. He didn't sit in the front row. He stayed in the back, hands clasped, watching others react. There was humility in that, a quiet satisfaction that didn't need applause. When the film ended, the crowd stood to clap. He didn't. He just turned to me and whispered, "This time, I want the story to belong to someone else." And I think that was the moment I realized how far he'd come. The man who once feared being forgotten had finally found peace in letting go. After the event, he walked me outside. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Streetlights shimmered off the pavement like melted stars. "You doing okay?" he asked softly. I smiled. "Better than before?" "Good, because, you saved me once. But the truth is, you saved yourself too." I looked at him, not as the legend, not as the boss who once fired me, but as a human being. Older, wiser, still standing. "We both did," I said quietly. Before we parted, he handed me something small, a keychain. It was an old brass boxing glove, slightly worn. "From the old gym," he said. I figured it belonged to someone who knows how to fight the quiet kind of battles. I held it tightly, the metal cool against my palm. "Thank you," I whispered. "No," he said with that faint smile. "Thank you." He turned to leave, walking slowly down the street. No bodyguards, no cameras, no crowd. Just a man who had found his way back to himself. That night, I went home and placed the little boxing glove beside his letter. Then I sat by the window, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small or forgotten. I felt complete. Because sometimes the greatest stories aren't about love that lasts forever, but love that helps someone remember who they are. It's been a few years now since that night in the rain. Since the moment I last saw him walking away, his shadow stretching long across the empty streetlights. I still work behind the scenes. Different projects, new faces, same quiet dedication. But no matter where I go, I carry the lessons he never meant to teach me. That success means nothing if you lose yourself. That kindness is strength in disguise. And that sometimes, the greatest act of love is stepping away once your part in someone's story is done. Every now and then, I'll see him on television. A guest appearance, a small tribute, a quiet smile. And I notice the light in his eyes, steadier, softer, grounded. He still writes, still mentors, still gives people the kind of hope he once needed himself. And though we don't speak as often anymore, I like to think he knows I'm still cheering for him somewhere just beyond the spotlight. Sometimes when I pass the old gym, I stop by for a moment. It's mostly empty now, just echoes of gloves hitting the bag, and the faint hum of old fluorescent lights. I'll stand there, close my eyes, and listen. And in that quiet, I can almost hear his voice again. Raspy, warm, familiar. "Keep punching, Lena." I smile every time. Because he was never just talking about boxing. He was talking about life. About not giving up when the world forgets your name. About standing tall, even when no one's watching. When people ask me about him, I don't talk about the fame or the films. I talk about the silence between takes. The laughter over cold coffee. The man who was tired but never cruel. The man who taught me that strength isn't loud, it's steady. And if they ask what happened between us, I tell them this. He fired me once, but in a way he also freed me, because losing that job was what led me to the person I am now. Someone who knows her worth doesn't depend on being needed. Some stories don't end with reunion or romance. They end with understanding, and that's enough. That's what this story was all along. Not about fame or forgiveness, but about two people finding their way back to themselves through kindness. He found peace. I found purpose. And that's what I want the world to remember. Even if your part in someone's life is temporary, Your compassion can echo forever. So if you're listening tonight, somewhere out there, to anyone who ever gave too much, stayed too long, or cared in silence, remember this: you didn't lose them. You helped them heal. And sometimes, that's the kind of love that changes everything. A window closes, a light flickers out, and the camera pulls back slowly, revealing only a quiet street and the sound of rain. Somewhere the world keeps moving. And in that gentle stillness, so do we. Sometimes the people we save never forget us, even when they move on, and neither should we.